am Connie from Prosperity Finance, sharing the best financial tips so that you can be more successful with achieving your financial goals. Today, I have a secret guest. Well, she is not really secret. You probably met with her several times in our channel. So her name is Joy Yuan. She's an associate at Turner Hopkins. She very specialized in commercial and property law. And because her background in commercial and property, she always gives clients the best advice and very practical advice. Now, today, what we're going to discuss is about off-plan purchase. Now, you probably heard about off-plan. Off-plan means you buy a property based on a piece of paper. So that's going to be your home or rental property once it's been built. A lot of people get really attracted by the promotions. It looks, really nice, and normally in the good suburbs, and it's brand new. So it's very, very, very attractive. However, there's always risk associated with those attractiveness. So today, I invite Joy to discuss some of the pitfalls with the purchasing off-plan property. Now, as long as you pay attention to those and get professional advice from your experienced solicitor, actually it could be a really good buy. So firstly, let's welcome Joy. Hello, Joy.
Hi, Connie. Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Joy, for coming along. Joy, as I mentioned before this meeting, now recently I have a client, he actually based in Wellington. Now he and his wife bought an off-plan property about 2 years ago. The project actually took much longer than expected. Put that aside, they still think worthwhile waiting, especially Wellington experienced some capital growth over the last couple of years. However, I heard a bad news a few months ago from that client. He told me that for whatever the reason, he didn't understand, but somehow the contract got cancelled. He did get back the deposit, but it was really, really angry. He was really angry because he said, if I had bought an alternative property in Wellington, probably property has gone up significant value, but now he gone back to zero. So he's really angry. But I think this is just one of the risks that associated with buying off-plan property. There must be some other aspects. So today I just want you to share with your professional advice. Obviously, it's general advice, it's not personal. But just to talk about what are the pitfalls associated with off-plan purchase, so people become aware and maybe have some practical tips how to minimize those risks.
Yeah, sure, definitely. We're happy to share that. So first of all, just want to explain a little bit about the concept of off-plans. So usually off-plans means you buying or you enter into a sale and purchase agreement to buy a property that hasn't been the construction work hasn't been completed. So you often just based on the concept plan and also specification list will be your sort of the description of your future house. And often we see that with the off-plan purchase property, the agreement often used is drafted as agreement that drafted by the vendor solicitor. So it will have a lot of unusual terms. It will have those terms more favor to the vendor to ensure that the purchaser can't get out of the contract, and the vendor has the flexibility at the same time to make some changes when they're required to do that. So it is very important to have those contracts reviewed very carefully and make sure that it is reviewed carefully and make sure all the purchaser's interest and risk to be protected and the risk to be minimized. So today we're just going to talk about the advice we give to first-time property purchasers, in particular about buying off-plan properties. And usually the advice that I'll give is from the purchaser point of view. There's two sides of homework or due diligence need to be carried out. Before you enter into any off-plan agreement, it is important you as the purchaser step back and look at the deal in front of you and do some research around the developer about the location of the property and school zones. If you look at school zones, make sure there's no make sure there's no changes, and also the developer in particular is experienced developers. You can look at other previous projects done by the developer, how well they delivered, and whether they deliver the project within the set time frame. So those are really important homework. And also, you normally will receive a copy of the plan and also a specification list, which will be attached to the agreement. So have a read of that agreement, especially if buying a residential, dwelling on a fee simple section. Have a really careful understanding about the plan, especially if the construction work hasn't been commenced, and make sure you understand how big your future house the floor area will be, and what specification will be used. So those are the homework that purchaser must carry out even before you decide to enter into an agreement. Then the next step is for the lawyers to review of your agreement. My advice is engage with a lawyer before you enter into any contract. Even we know that sometimes some of the contract will have a cooling off period, such as solicitor approval or purchase approval clause. But sometimes some clauses would say that even you cancel, those conditions, your initial deposit $2,000 or $3,000 is not refundable. So it is quite important to have a lawyer at the very beginning stage before you sign a contract to review the terms for you and make sure that you're happy with what you are signing. And if we go further details, I know it is quite nervous for first home buyer to know, to understand, and to also to have a good understanding about the process buying off plans, because as first home buyer you haven't properly experienced buying any properties, and the difficulties with buying off plans or it's a lot higher than buying an existing house. So the usual sort of concerns we come across is the first, people will ask whether my deposit will be safe. Normally, if you buy off plan, you'll be required to pay 10% or sometimes 15% to the purchase price as deposit. And often people will also ask second question, what if the vendor, go in receivership or not completing the project? What's going to happen? And also question is about what if there's delays? So those are the very usual sort of questions we come across. And then it is important to review what your agreement says. In New Zealand, the sign and purchase agreement contract is the basis for the contractual relationship. Everything goes by what says in the contract. So when we review of the agreement, we normally will see what the clauses say about deposit. If we're advising for a purchaser, we want to make sure the deposit is safe in a stakeholder trust account. It can be the vendor solicitor trust account, so the vendor cannot touch or access to that money until settlement or when the house is being completed building. So that's really important. And secondly, if there's delays, you want to make sure there's at least a sunset clause in the agreement. Sunset clause sort of give a limitation to the settlement date. If by sunset date the settlement is not triggered, then the party will have the right to cancel it. As a purchaser, you want to make sure only the purchaser, you have the right to cancel it, not both parties. For the very unfortunate case that Connie just talked about, for your Wellington client, I suspect that in his case, the vendor may be using the sunset clause as a reason to cancel the contract and causing his losses. So that's very, unfortunate result and disappointing for that particular person buyer. But if you nail that at the beginning of your contract, then this is avoidable. So that's part of negotiation between the parties. And thirdly, you also want to make sure that for material changes, your agreement will be covered. So, for example, if you buy an apartment, there should be some provision about measurement of areas. If the final areas is different, a lot less than what you have signed up for, then you want to know how the purchase price will be adjusted. Different version of that measurement clause adjustment clause can give you different results. We've seen probably 4 different versions. Some versions says that if there's a significant area difference by 5%, then whatever above 5% can be reduced by purchase price. But some other cases maybe say that need to be referred to a valuer for determination. So we often, when we come across to those sort of measurement clauses, we would prefer to see those versions where it says that if the measurement different by 2 or 5%, then if it's then it's less than if it's less than the estimated area, then the purchase price should be reduced accordingly. So there's different versions of that type of clauses you can negotiate. And I'm sure that your lawyer will be able to help you and make sure those important clauses are checked out very carefully and reduce the risks for the buyers to buy off plans. Yeah. And apart from that, I think we also that have for some bigger development, there also may be some vendor conditions in the agreement. So that depends on the stage of development is. The vendor may have some of their conditions, such as the agreement will be subject to the vendor obtain the finance or obtain the relevant resource consent and building consent. So have a good understanding about at which stage this particular project is at. It's also really important. For example, we don't really recommend a client buy off plans if it's residential and it's at a very early stage, because there's no guarantees that the plan you see will be the final product plan. It's better that if the plan is already approved by the council or almost approved, then you have a good understanding of what you will get. And one way to put it is when you sign a contract, you should make sure that based on the based on the floor plan and the specification list, you can draw a 3D plan in your head of your house, of your future house, including what kind of door, handle, how you're working, the layout, the bedroom, and all the material. So that's very important for a purchaser to do those and have a good understanding of those off-plan properties. So it reduces the risk of that. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Joy. There's actually a lot of aspects that need to be aware. It's really important that you do get really experienced solicitor who has done similar either work for the developer in the past, or they have support their clients with settlements of off-plan property. Otherwise, it could be really daunting, really overwhelming, and a lot of risks before the settlements. Yeah, definitely there's some factors that outside our control, like the weather, the council progress, but at least you could do, I guess, 70-80% minimize those risks. That will smooth out your whole kind of a journey. So really great tips. Thank you so much. Finally, Joy, so if people are looking to buy off-plan property, do they just get in touch with any solicitor, or they need some criteria who is experienced in this area? What is the criteria normally?
I would say that experienced property lawyer would be great. So they come across different sort of off-plan agreements in the past, especially if you're buying an apartment, so that lawyers familiar with those apartment sale and purchase agreement. That'll be also helps to have a good understanding about it. And sometimes a solicitor, if they've acted for a vendor or developer in the past, so knows the both side of the story and make sure that a practical advice is provided to you, and that's always really good.
Excellent. Thank you so much. If you still couldn't find anyone that fit the box, contact Joy. So you will find Joy's contact detail in this video below. Again, thank you so much, Joy, and thank you for the listeners. Thank you for your time. If you find our video useful, please feel free to subscribe or forward it to your family friends so they can benefit from that as well. All right, I will see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Connie.
Bye.
Bye.